Thank you for attending this Illinois Humanities Rhodes Scholars Speakers Bureau event. The mission of Illinois Humanities is to strengthen the social, political, and economic fabric of Illinois through constructive conversation and civic engagement. Our Rhodes Scholars Speakers Bureau supports that mission by inviting Illinois authors, artists, and scholars to share their expertise and enthusiasm with people and communities throughout our state. After this event, we hope you'll complete the audience feedback survey, which will pop up on your screen after tonight's program, which will help the organization as they plan future programs and seek support for their work. To learn about other Rhodes Scholar presentations, their other programs, and grant opportunities, please visit ilhumanities.org, and I will put that in the chat for you in just a second. We hope you enjoy the presentation tonight. So I am so excited and honored to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Ada Cheng. Dr. Cheng is a professor turned storyteller, solo performer, and storytelling show producer. She's a tenured professor in sociology at DePaul University from 2001 to 2016, when she resigned to pursue storytelling and performance full time. So Dr. Cheng, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm not going to do a formal presentation. I'm going to do a solo performance, and not quite was a solo performance I created in 2016, but this is an updated version. And so this is what is going to happen. I'm going to tell 3 sets of stories. And they will highlight issues and affecting Asian Americans, and so I will talk through, give some context of each story, and so let's treat it as a solo and wait until the end to have a conversation for Q&A. The first piece was written at the end of 2016. And it's called Entitled, Where is Home? I live in Chicago. I've lived here for 20 years. Before I moved to Chicago, I was in Austin, Texas for 5 years. Before I moved to Austin, I was in Hong Kong, still a British colony at the time, for 7 months. Before I moved to Hong Kong, I was in New York for 4 months. Before I moved to New York, I was in Eugene, Oregon for 3 years. Before I moved to Eugene, I was in Taipei, Taiwan for 27 years. I was born in Taiwan 57 years ago. I came to this country 30 years ago. The last time I went back to Taiwan was 20 years ago. So where is home? How do you define it? By where you were born? By the duration of your stay? By the length of your absence? Or by the intensity of your emotions? I have lived in this country for over a quarter of a century. I still have a tough time answering questions like, are you from Chicago? Where are you from? These questions always throw me off. I have lived in different cities for different durations of time. And if you don't specify, I assume you want to know the origin of my birthplace. For some of us, it's not a city in the United States. It's another country, another continent, and in my case, an island in the Pacific Ocean. What does home mean, really? Whenever I'm asked, where are you from? Regardless of the intention of the questioner, I'm always reminded that Chicago is not quite home. I don't quite belong, not quite. I'm always reminded that I'm an alien, a transplant coming from somewhere easily identifiable and easily identified. Look at me, my skin color, my facial features, my appearance, my clothing, my demeanor, and my speech. Everything about me marks me. So after being a green card holder for 10 years and being an immigrant for 25 years, I finally decided to apply for American citizenship in 2015. 2 weeks after I did my citizenship interview, I received a notice from the Citizenship and Immigration Services of Homeland Security notifying me that my citizenship application had been approved. And my swearing ceremony was scheduled on May 27th, 2015. Do you remember May 2015? What was happening in different parts of this country, in cities like Baltimore, Cincinnati, Los Angeles, and Seattle? I'll come back to that later. My citizenship application process has been smooth, except the carelessness with which the USCIS staff handled my mail. They mailed out a notice without sealing the envelope, and my notice with my full legal name, my social security number, my green card number, and my address was sticking out of the envelope in my mailbox. Are you kidding me? I have been paying taxes in this country for 15 years, and you couldn't take 2 seconds to seal one of the most important documents in my life? I invited my then partner and the chair of the department at the university where I was a full-time faculty member to join me for the ceremony. So on May 27, 2015, my guests and I arrived at the USCIS building in downtown Chicago right before 1 p.m. We passed through the security check and up to the third floor where there was a huge waiting area. After waiting for half an hour, I was called to stand in line in order to move to the large ceremony hall. And right at the entrance of the ceremony hall, there was a long desk and 3 agents were sitting there. When it was my turn, the first agent took my green card and the notice. The second agent examined them and threw them into a big yellow envelope. And the third agent checked my name off the list. My heart sank when I turned in my green card. This was the only legal documentation in my possession to prove that I was documented or legal in this country. I didn't bring my Illinois ID with me that day, so I didn't have any ID to show who I was, but even if I did, they wouldn't have proved my legal status. So at that moment, I was without legal documentation. I started to panic as I walked into the big hall where hundreds of people like me had already been seated. It was very scary to be with hundreds of people without legal documentation. It was as if we were waiting for a collective sentence because theoretically, any one of us could be arrested, locked up, or deported right there and then. But deported back to where? It has been 3 decades since I left Taiwan in 1991. The last time I went back to the island was 1999. I still have family there, but it hasn't been home for more than 3 decades. Going back there is not necessarily going home, but then where is home? My heart pounced every time I saw an agent walk toward my direction. And I kept on thinking to myself, is this a trap? Is the agent going to tell me that something was wrong with my application and they changed their mind about naturalizing me? Did they not believe me when I indicated on the application form and when I told them face to face that I never torture anyone. I never engaged in genocide. I was never part of the Nazi government in Germany. I was not a terrorist. I was not a communist. I never intend or attempt to overthrow the US government. I was never part of the guerrilla groups. I never sold weapons. I was never in prison. I never committed any felonies. I was not a gambler. I was not an alcoholic. I never abused any drugs. I pay my taxes. I never force anyone to have sex, and I never solicit sex. I was a saint, still am one. Suddenly, I saw my then partner and the chair enter the hall and take their seat. And the USCIS director walked up to the podium and announced that we would start the ceremony. I felt a sense of relief. The citizenship ceremony included watching documentaries about US immigration history and American exceptionalism, listening to speeches, singing national anthem, and I'm not going to sing tonight because I don't torture people, pledging allegiance to the flag, and receiving the certificate of naturalization. In the first documentary we watched, the narrator talked about how we, like the previous generations of immigrants, that we were fortunate to escape war, poverty, and religious and political repressions to come to this country to pursue our American dream. I suddenly felt terrible that I invited my chair to the ceremony. You see, my chair was a 70-year-old African-American man. His ancestors didn't come to this country voluntarily. In his parents' time, people of different races were not allowed to swim in the same swimming pool. And what was happening in May 2015? Activists like Black Lives Matter have been protesting against police brutality for quite some time. Baltimore was particularly under scrutiny because of the death of Freddie Gray. War is now outside of the United States. War is right here in the United States, in our own backyard, against our own people. What was my celebration was not necessarily his to have, even though he was very happy for me. But it was also very difficult for him to sit there and to listen to the rhetoric about American exceptionalism as a Black man. Our stories were connected, yet very different under the system of white supremacy. So I did complete my citizenship ceremony and received my certificate of naturalization. And this is now the legal documentation to prove that I am indeed an American citizen. I didn't pay attention to it when I received it, and I immediately locked it up in my safe without realizing I would need it again a year later. So this is my citizenship, the certificate of naturalization. There are two numbers on it. There's this number for the certificate, 4343A34, and there's another number, A944343A7. Do you know what A stands for? I did not realize the significance of these two numbers until when I tried to apply for Affordable Care Act health insurance in December 2016. I was asked to provide these two numbers when I identify myself as a naturalized citizen. And that A stands for alien. That's my alien registration number, a number I carried for decades before becoming a citizen, and a number I will continue to carry. These two numbers are for registration, and there's always, always a registry for aliens. Most people would assume that the process of naturalization enables immigrants like me, and let me be very clear, a privileged one, to assimilate into this country, to be part of this country, and to finally be home. I have contributed to this country by educating young minds at a university for decades. And here is the irony, not as a citizen, but as an immigrant. First, on my H-1B visa, and then with my green card. This country has entrusted immigrants with some of her most important jobs, including raising children, caring for the sick, cleaning houses, and educating young minds. Yet, we are forever unwelcome. As much as I try to blend in by achieving the American dream, this country, or shall I say this government, is never going to let me forget that I am indeed an alien and will forever be one. So this is my American journey. American dreams pursued and achieved, but I'm still not home. Thank you. So this is the first piece written in late 2016. The second piece I'm going to read and perform. It was written in late 2019. And it's entitled, Dear White Woman. Dear white woman, I regretted saying nothing to you, so I'm writing this letter. It was a good day that first Friday in October 2019, sunny and cool. It was around 2 p.m. I just finished presenting my gender-based violence workshop at the medical school at UIC. I had started this new job with the university in July, and this workshop was the first major one I had to conduct with this new position. I was happy because I thought everything went well, so well that the student organizers told me that they wanted me back in spring. I was feeling proud standing in front of the medical school building entrance on Polk Street. When I ordered a lift to return to my office, you were right there dropping off someone. I was elated that I didn't have to wait long. The day is really going my way, I thought to myself. I got into your car and said, thank you so much. How are you? My standard greeting to a Lyft driver. You glanced at me through the mirror and said, I'm good. Where are you from? Just like that. We're sitting inches from each other, yet the chasm between us suddenly feels like 1,000 miles. I paused. Where are you from? It's one of my most dreaded questions. I was asked so very often before becoming a citizen in 2015. It was simple. When I first arrived in this country from Taiwan as a student back in 1991. I was foreign, after all, with my stronger accent and wearing clothing I brought from home. Yet, with each passing year or decade, this question has become more complicated and layered. I can no longer answer it with ease. This question was posed to me even after I became a citizen in May 2015. That same afternoon, after the naturalization ceremony, in the days and the weeks and the months and years afterwards, that question never stopped. Why would I have expected anything different? The certificate of naturalization, that piece of paper certifying my citizenship status, didn't change anyone's perception of me as someone from somewhere else. My status might have changed, but my face didn't. I mean, my accent wasn't that thick, so thick that you would mistake me as foreign. You had no other reference than this face of mine, the only marker of difference, just like a million other faces from Asia. And when I hesitated, you asked, originally, like I didn't know what you were asking, like I didn't already have a script for this question, like I hadn't answered the second question over and over, like I hadn't already said originally myself many times before, like my silence was my lack of understanding of your words or English. No, I was killing you softly in the back seat with my gaze, filled with both sorrow and rage, calculating how much I should let your remark and therefore you shape the rest of my day or days after that. When I told you I was from Taiwan, you started talking about how your brother-in-law was working there and how he loved it. I asked you which city he was living on the island. You couldn't say. You simply went on and on about his beautiful experiences in Asia. I wanted to tell you, I don't care. I mean, do you even know the difference between Taiwan and Thailand? Because many Americans can't even distinguish these two countries since the first part for these two words sounds exactly the same. I wanted to lecture you about profiling, though, a softer type of profiling, the type of profiling that doesn't kill us, but it marks us as different. It tells us we don't belong. It is a form of racial profiling masked as cultural curiosity, often loved by both liberals and conservatives alike, pretending to be cosmopolitan. Yet culture is no substitute for race. You might ask, does it mean that I can't ask this question at all? Of course not. It is not that you can't ask it. It is how and when you ask the question. It's the context within which you ask it. Context is everything. Ask yourself, is this how you meet and greet every human being you come across on your drive, in the party, on the street? Or do you direct this phrase to only people with certain facial features deemed as foreign and alien, or shall we say, exotic? There are millions of people with facial features similar to mine who were born in the United States. This is the place they call home. They are not from somewhere else. They have always been here. By asking them that question, you're telling them that they don't fit the image of what an American should be. Where are you from marks someone as an outsider, outside of a norm and a standard against which you used to judge them. I'm the other against the white faces you count as American. Whether I was indeed born somewhere else is beside the point. I might be a citizen on paper, but it is still a long way to belong and to call this country home, even after 3 decades. Let me tell you a story. I once performed my solo not quite at Des Moines, Iowa. During the talkback, a middle-aged white woman vehemently disputed my comment about the racial implications of this phrase. She insisted that she could not be racist since her husband, sitting right next to her, was a Chinese man from Hong Kong. It was as if her physical proximity to a person of color could excuse or exonerate her of any bias or prejudice. She said that she was simply curious about other cultures. Insisting on her good intentions, she wouldn't stop arguing until another white audience asked her to ponder this question: who is in the rightful place to define racism? I believe you if you say you were simply trying to be friendly, except benevolent intentions don't always matter, especially when they lead to harmful impact. Not on you, but on me. It should have been a great day for me. Instead, I spent the 7-minute ride debating if I should get out of a car, if saving $5 was worth my dignity, if I should educate you as opposed to simply enjoying my existence, if I should trade dignity for convenience, if I should stay quiet while struggling with my own conscience and doubting if I did the right thing with my silence. All the energy that should have been reserved for my joy that day was wasted on you while you were so oblivious to everything. I used to intervene until my energy was completely drained, until I no longer had joy in life. And then I realized this: not every fight should be my fight. I have to pick my battle just to preserve some sanity, so I can thrive, not just survive. So I sulked in the back seat and decided that I would write you a letter entitled, "Dear White Woman." I consider this piece your compensation for my short ride with you. Best, Ada. Thank you so much. So this piece is called Dear White Woman and was written in late 2019. The third piece and the final piece I'm going to perform is called A Letter to My Younger Self. And I want to give you some context about this piece. I work at UIC as the education and outreach specialist for gender-based violence. And so this piece is a series of exchanges between myself and the student. Something happened to the student. The student probably didn't know where to go, so send an email to my unit, and the email arrived at my desk. The incident took place in February 2020. So I wrote this piece almost a year ago. I didn't change anything because I want to give you a sense of where I was, what my thinking and my anxiety and my concern was. A year ago, even without having to witness the intensification of anti-Asian racism during this past year. So, a letter to my younger self. Dear university staff, hello. I want to report an insulting incident that happened to us today. My friends and I were at this building trying to grab some coffee. We were waiting in line, and finally, when it was our turn to order, we stepped forward. During that short time, we heard an absurd racist joke that people at the cashier made, saying, "Watch out for the coronavirus." As everyone knows, the coronavirus is a global issue that has taken away more than 500 innocent lives. Treating us as that virus is both humiliating and insulting to the people who are suffering and fighting for that contagious disease. It is very unfortunate that this occurred during the Black History Month, the month that we all believe no one should be discriminated based on the color of their skin. I hope you examine this issue. We sincerely want an apology for this inconvenience. Student. Dear student, thank you for the message. I'm very sorry this happened to you. I would like to meet in person to discuss the situation further. Let me know when you can stop by. Ada. Dear Ada, thank you for your kindness. We were all furious about the incident. However, after knowing that there are people who actually care for minorities like us, it gives us pride knowing that we chose to come to the school. Again, thank you for offering us the option to deal with this matter. But we have decided not to make a scene. Student. Dear student, I don't think you'll ever read this message. I do hope at some point you will tell the story on your own. I haven't been able to sleep for days since I received your email. That last sentence, "we have decided not to make a scene," hit me hard. That sentence has filled me with sadness. It feels like someone has driven a knife slowly into my heart. I'm not going to die from it, but my heart aches and bleeds with each gentle cut and push. Your message was the first complaint I received, but it was not the first one I have heard. Since the outbreak of the coronavirus, we have seen an increase of hatred toward Chinese people, people of Asian descent, or Asian Americans in general. Physical assaults have taken place, racial slurs hurled, suspicious looks cast, masks put on specifically when Asian people are present. Otherwise, socially conscious people making jokes and references about the virus and Chinese people. Businesses in Chinatown plummeted due to misinformation, xenophobia, and racism. In a world where racism is oftentimes seen between Black and white, discrimination, prejudice, racism, and xenophobia toward and against Asians are often taken for granted and normalized. That even UC at Berkeley briefly posted something online along the line. Xenophobia is a normal response after the outbreak. Our own president insisting on calling the virus Chinese or Wuhan, knowing fully well that a pandemic will bring out pre-existing hatred, xenophobic sentiments, and racist assaults against people of Asian descent. Different universities sent warning emails to students about the virus, yet very few made public statements denouncing anti-Asian racism. We don't label any germ, disease, illness, or virus white when they wiped out Native American tribes. Why do we label Corona Asian? This pandemic shows how easily we, as Asian Americans, can go from being model minority to yellow peril in this country within seconds. But what I want to write here is not about the virus. It is about that last sentence of yours. We have decided not to make a scene. I truly see you because you remind me of my younger self. When I used to believe that people would understand where I was coming from and empathize with my position if I were polite enough, respectful enough, articulate enough, or liked enough. And then it dawned on me one day. My degree of politeness, respectfulness, or likability has little to do with whether people can grasp the complexity of issues. For many, they understand them all alone. In my or our culture, I was taught since I was young to be quiet, to not speak up, to not challenge authorities, and to keep peace and maintain harmony. I had to work very hard to develop my own voice and to have one. When I was younger, I tried hard to balance between having a voice and wanting to be liked, having ideas and opinions and being seen to opinionated and loud, and telling people how I really felt and what I really thought, and not wanting to alienate anyone with my truth. I still struggle with that. And I'm in my 50s. The reality is this: there's no balance. It is a lose-lose situation for me as a woman. I do have the benefit of racial perception. I'm hardly seen as militant or aggressive as an Asian woman, even when I am, compared to a Black woman who can easily be seen as aggressive, even when she's simply being assertive. My body, as much as it may be sexually objectified, exoticized, or violated, is not seen as threatening, thus allowing me to freely navigate the world without anyone calling the police on me. And we know the ways our bodies are perceived can have life and death consequences. But the worst part is this: when you don't practice speaking up for yourself, you end up losing the only voice you have, your own. I want you to remember this. Silence can be a strength, but it isn't always a virtue. Being quiet doesn't always bring you to peace. Being polite doesn't always keep you out of trouble. Being respectful doesn't always get you the respect in return. Please learn to tell your own stories, as I can't always tell stories for others. Learn to shout on top of your lung. Make a scene. Be the troublemaker. Be the trouble for yourself and others. It's time. It's time. Ada. Oh, thank you so much. So this is the third piece that's called A Letter to My Younger Self. So this concludes my solo performance, where each story distinctly tackles a particular issue affecting Asian Americans. So this is what I usually do with my solo performance. You know, when I created my solo performance, I took it to different cities to engage the audience with conversations. And so this is what we're going to do. We're simply going to have a conversation. And feel free to, if you would like to ask questions or make comments, you can use the chat. or you can request if you want to be heard. Courtney, do we have that option? If people want, okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay, very good. So why don't we simply open up and so yes, I agree, Lisa. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amazing Story. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. Courtney, why don't we start with you for you to kick off the conversation? You are the host. So
Absolutely.
yeah, what's your thought? And we can simply start with the feelings. You know, this is what storytelling is about. Really is about connecting with people emotionally so we can have empathy, understanding, compassion, and hopefully actions. So, you know, give me some thoughts and feedback. And I really
Definitely.
appreciate all the comments so far.
Yes, and there was a in the Q&A some Sarah Jane said wonderful, and I put that in the answer. So yeah, if anyone does have any thoughts, feelings, feedback, questions, definitely throw those in the chat or the Q&A, and then we can give you the ability to speak if you are comfortable doing so. So I just felt those were so powerful and so vital right now. And just a few things that stuck out for me, just when you were getting your citizenship, I mean, the fear when you gave your documentation momentarily over during that fear and anxiety of having it taken away and thinking, I could be arrested right now, I could be deported. And during that, such an important ceremony is just so, so telling of an experience that many of us don't have that were born here. And I mean, that just really stuck out to me. And then also, Taiwan not being home, but being here is still not home. And I was wondering, have you come to the point in the place where you do feel at home here in the United States?
Good question. I'm going to address the first one and then
Yeah.
the second. Great question. So, you know, oftentimes when we look at in our own psyche, the American psyche, right? That when we ask immigrants to tell stories about naturalization and citizenship, oftentimes we expect a narrative of gratitude, right? That we feel that immigrants should be grateful for the opportunities and resources. And absolutely true. Of course, I'm grateful. I'm full of gratitude. But here is also the thing, it is far more complicated than that. That is, think about, I got my green card in 2006. So I waited for 10 years to get my citizenship. Why? Because when you get an American citizenship, in some way you give up something. Even if you say you're going to maintain dual citizenship, you still give up something, right? And so for me, is ambivalence, right? I have this identity as a Taiwanese citizen, and so for me, changing it to become an American, it was a struggle. Of course, in my career, I established my career here. I went to graduate school here in the United States. No doubt, I have my friends, and they're all here. But becoming American also means I give up something, an identity that I held for a long time. And so there's that ambivalence. And something I want to sort of talk about the citizenship ceremony is we talk, it's ambivalence, it's also the reservation. I when I did this talk, and there are uh, white, Europeans, for example, who became naturalized citizen, right? So they talked about, they never really thought about that reservation or being nervous at a ceremony. And here's the thing, if you look at a history, think about Asian American experiences, look at a Japanese internment experience, that these are Americans of Japanese descent, right? And they were citizens. Yeah, they were evicted from their house, taken away, and put into camps, right? Relocated. And that's the history. That's the important for us to think about this whole idea that simply because you become an American citizen, that citizenship is guaranteed forever. That's not necessarily true. It really depends on how government, right, defined it. And even these past few years, we have heard cases where even, for example, Americans of Latino descent, the people don't see them as Americans, right? And so that's why, when we think about having that citizenship, right, that piece of paper certifying your status is very different from having a sense of belonging, having a sense of home. That's two very different things. And here's also the reality is that as much as I talk about the ambivalence, right, about becoming and the being an American, I also think about I'm considered a so-called good immigrant. When I walk down the street, I don't get profiled, but I do know I have friends who are immigrants. They do get profiled. They do get stopped, right? And so that's something to think about how the different ranking among the immigrant communities, who is seen as the good or unfit, right? Immigrant, right? It's not just about immigrants. It's really who is considered a good immigrant, fit for citizenship, and who is considered unfit. And that's the key issue. But the first piece is really about having that piece of paper is very different from having a sense of belonging and being included. And if we're going to talk about having a sense of belonging and inclusion, that's a very different kind of work, right? Now, the second question is, do I feel at home? I think I'm at a point in my life where home is inside me. I'm the center of the earth, right? So wherever I go, home is within me. Because I already accept the fact that the home is not a physical dwelling that we live in. It's not this house I own, this condo I own. It's not, because I might move, right? I might not live here. I might move. So I stopped thinking about defining home based on the dwelling, but I think about home as more right now, present, right? Who is my family member? It may not be defined by blood, right? Whom do I have connection? But home is never permanent for me. And home is within me. As long as I am at home with myself, and wherever I go, I will be at home. But here's to the reality. I have come to the point where I can kind of stay grounded. But the truth is, for me as an Asian American, I always feel I'm straddling the borderlands. I'm in between, right? If you look at Asian Americans, that we are here, we're there, but we're neither here, we're neither there, right? We're everywhere, but we are not necessarily seen. We oftentimes are invisible. And so what I want to really explore is this lack of a groundedness, really straddling between borderlands, in between status. This is kind of where we are. And that's really the second piece is about, that if you look at the Asian Americans have been here for hundreds of years, right? But yet we still have this image of the perpetual foreigner, right? And that's the second piece is about. That is, if we are consistently, if you ask Asian Americans, most likely they have the experience of being asked, where are they from? And that's because of the image of the perpetual foreigner. And so that's really tied to, even for people who were born here, this is supposed to be their home. But it really doesn't feel like having one when you are consistently being asked, where are you from?
And that was actually going to be my next, comment was that question, where are you from, as your most dreaded question. Because I was talking before tonight's program about our panel last week on stereotypes against Asian Americans. And one of our panelists was a woman whose parents immigrated here from Thailand, ironically, because you say that people often get Taiwan and Thailand confused. And she talked about that. She would be asked all the time, where are you from? And she's like, Chicago. I'm from Chicago. I was born here. And so I just thought that was, really just interesting. And also the comment about exoticism too. So she talked about that as well. So
It is so difficult to know when to let things go and when not. Your friend last week referenced their kids as 10 as someone with dark skin. I didn't know how to react. I know that saying something will make them uncomfortable. I have difficulty choosing. Oh, great question. I'm going to address that question. Something really important. This perpetual foreigner. It didn't bother me 30 years ago. I mean, I was a foreigner, right? And then 5 years later, I was still being asked that question. 10 years later, and then I started to realize, well, how far do you want me to trace back, right? And here's the thing. This is always I ask people. Um, I always ask people to look at your pattern, because if this is really a question about cultural curiosity, all of us, everyone has culture. But you don't ask everyone that question, right? So I want people to examine their pattern. That is, if you go to a bar, go to a party, if the first thing you approach someone and the first question is, where are you from? It's always a marker of difference, because somebody doesn't fit the image of who should be here. And it has nothing to do with cultural curiosity, because everyone has culture. If it really is about culture, you would have asked everyone the same question. But the truth is that question is never asked everyone, only select people who look foreign, people who look exotic, right? And I would say this is a common experience for people of Asian descent, people of Latino descent. They get asked a lot, right? Or Arab American, Muslim Americans. And so something to think about that is, you can ask a question, but it is always like, Courtney, if today I come to you and immediately, where are you from? That says something about what's my preconception about who should be local. But if we have a conversation, long conversation, hey, Courtney, where do you live? Do you remember before the event started, we had that conversation? And then at some point you asked me, hey, Ada, before you went to graduate school, where did you? If we have that long conversation that leads to the question of where were you born, where are you from, then that makes sense. So I want people to really think about that question has to be within context. But if that's your first impulse to ask somebody, where are you from? Oftentimes that means their preconception of what an American should be, right? Now, I want to address this question about, the battle. In a lot of Asian Americans are experiencing, we see these, physical violence, right? That we see, and that's really what brought us to this awareness of anti-Asian violence, even though anti-Asian violence has existed for centuries, right? 1875 page law, 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, the anti-Asian race is a century law. Now, because we're witnessing the physical violence, that's what we see. But oftentimes when you ask Asian Americans, what they experience is what I call the racialized microaggression, right? And essentially racialized microaggression is racism. It's really about the things people say to them. things that people do to them, right? So one of the comments mentioned that, right? That is, what do you do when people say things? How do you intervene? And I will tell you, as somebody, as a woman of color who experienced this, I have to really pick my battles, that I cannot intervene every time. Otherwise, my energy will go places. But this is what I want to say. If you are an ally, if you consider yourself an ally, if you want to do good allyship, right? How do I become a better ally? I want you to think about this. Allyship is not 9 to 5. Allyship is 24/7. So if you consider yourself as an ally, then consider intervening. If you see something, being done, or that you heard something that is not appropriate, intervene. Use your privilege to intervene, to strive for the greater good. And this is what I would encourage people to do. That is oftentimes, if you have privilege and if you can afford, right, to do that, then intervene on behalf of people who are being targeted. And most people know what it is when you see it. You know something is going on, then say something, right? There will be a risk. I mean, if it's not allyship. There's no cost, right? There's a cost. There will be consequences. But that's what good allyship is about. That's what bravery is about. And so I want to encourage everyone, if you consider yourself as an ally, consider intervening when necessary. Let me see. People with different dialects within you get a question too. Sometimes when they get absolutely was asked, where are you from? Laughed, Chicago dialect. Absolutely.
I'll go ahead and paste that so everyone can see that comment, because that was just sent to the panelists.
There's also, you mentioned about a model immigrant, model. Another things that plagues the Asian Americans is the myth of the model minority. Earlier, I talked about how the model immigrants and also unfit immigrants, that we have this particular perceptions, really the dominant narrative created oftentimes by politicians. And it is also the sort of the myth of the model minority, this idea that we are all successful, we're all doing well. The truth is, Asian Americans are not a monolithic group. There's such a disparity and inequity within the Asian American community. So think about it. I came in as a student, right? Which is fundamentally very qualitatively different in terms of my experiences from, for example, if someone entered this country as refugees, as asylum seekers, right? Or as someone who was undocumented. And so that's something to think about. That is the disparity within Asian Americans, this whole idea of the model minority. But most importantly, the myth of model minority oftentimes is used to scapegoat other racial, ethnic communities and pit one group against the other, right? And so we kind of need to pay attention to this conquer, divide and conquer. That is, groups are pitted against one another. So perpetual foreigner and the myth of a model minority is something for us to consider. Let me see, there's a question. Do people become a citizen of your former country get the same feeling as you're from those? Do people becoming a citizen of your former country get the same feeling as you are from? I want to make sure if I understand. Is it a question about whether people shared? Did you see that question at all, Courtney?
I see it, and I'm also not quite sure. Jan, if you wanted to, I could put you on mic if you wanted to clarify, let us know, or you can type in the chat or the Q&A to kind of clarify your question.
I don't know if the question is about whether everyone feels the same way as I do or thinks the same way. My storytelling is my personal stories, right? Is my personal feelings. They do resonate with a lot of Asian Americans, but I do not speak for everybody. So when I talk about the feelings of ambivalence, I'm talking about me, even though many Asian Americans, particularly if they're immigrants, they might have shared feelings. So if that's the question, I don't speak for, I speak for myself.
I was wondering, kind of going back to like picking your battles and
Mm-hmm.
not making a scene, and kind of going off of what Anjali asked about, this friend of hers, made a microaggression against, a tan of darker skin, and she's wondering, I was kind of wondering, like, how do you decide which battles to pick, as a person of color, when
Mm-hmm.
to say something, when to make a scene, and, reflecting on that with that interaction with that Lyft driver, do you wish you would have spoken up and made a scene and said, that's not okay?
Interesting. I want people to really think about picking a battle because I think that's an experience that people of color have, women of color will have, or women or LGBTQIA community, right? Everyone who has experiences of being marginalized or discriminated or excluded, regardless, we all have, think about this experience. When do I pick my battle, right? When do I say what needs to be said? Uh, Here's the thing that I oftentimes make very calculated decisions. That is, I do have to really think about, is this energy worth it, right? Is this argument with somebody in the lift, right? Is it worth it, or do I let it go and create art based on it? But I do speak up when it affects the structural issues. I do speak up oftentimes if it affects other marginalized people, right? And so it really is about the strategic choices and making sure that when I do pick that battle, it serves the purpose. Meaning, my speaking up serves a purpose that can address something, whether it is interpersonally or structurally. But I also have to say this: I conserve my energy. I really have to decide what's worth it. And here's the third thing to think about: picking the battle doesn't always have to be confrontational. Picking the battle can be about, for example, what I'm doing here, telling these stories. This is a form of picking a battle too. It doesn't always have to be about being confrontational with somebody. It can also be about, all right, okay, I'm learning this lesson. I'm taking this lesson to do education. That's a form of battling as well. So I want people to uh, think about what are the strategic choices that you're making, and making sure that the battles that you're picking can serve the purpose, can advance somebody, a collective well-being, can change something. But it is also okay if you feel you cannot do it. There are ways to engage in battles that doesn't always entail confrontation. It can be about art. It can be something long term. There are different ways to do work. I hope that's helpful.
And you can see Jan did try to clarify if you see that in
Okay.
the
I wonder if your
chat.
experience is the same as others in not US deal with a good question. Yeah, good question. Good question. Amanda said, I relate to how you were raised. This and your last story gave me ideas on different ways to speak up about experience of living with an often invisible disability. Your experience has some parallels, and I felt your anger with you by you putting us in your shoes through storytelling. This is what storytelling is about. That essentially it's not through the intellect, it's really through feelings, right? Even though I'm also engaging the audience intellectually, but really it's learning to put ourselves in other people's shoes. And then so hopefully see the shared experiences and also different experiences between us. And fundamentally it's really this is hopefully through this communication, right, that we are having communication right now, this exchanges, that I can inspire or compel you, right? If you need to speak up for yourself, do so. If you need to advocate for yourself, like I advocate for myself or for people similar to my experiences, you can do the same thing too. You know, put other people in your shoes so we have better understanding. And so this is part of the work. Is really, I hope that I inspire people, right, to tell your stories, the stories that need to be heard. And mine is just one kind of stories, right? I try to balance oppression and privileges at the same time. I'm also blind, right, to my own privileges. So if you are marginalized in any way, disability, sexuality, gender, race, anything, right? Tell your stories. Um, think about and why this is so powerful. I can do a formal presentation using PowerPoint and data for an hour. You probably would not remember a thing. But guess what? Tonight, you would think about my stories, right? And that's the power. My stories will stay with you, and you will be processing your own experience of exclusion, inclusion, having a sense of home in your own way. And that's the power of it, is the feelings, the emotions stay with you.
Absolutely. Well, I don't see any more questions or comments that have come up. Another audience member said so true. Which that summed it up really well. So there are no more questions or comments for our speaker. I think that might be a good place to stop as we're about 11 minutes past the hour. So Dr. Cheng, thank you so much for being here with us tonight and sharing your experiences with us. We can't thank you enough for that. And thank you all for joining us tonight. So everyone have a wonderful night, and thank you so much, Dr. Cheng.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Bye. Good night.